Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. That's not in your sheets. That's just the traditional thing that we do before we talk on the Dhamma. It's honoring the Buddha, the fully awakened one. So that's a traditional thing. So, Sabba papassa akaranang kusalasa upasampata sachitta pariodapanang etang buddhana sasanang. These are ancient words of advice from the Buddha, and they are a summary of what he teaches. The first line is to avoid all unskillful, harmful action. The second line is to perform skillful, beneficial action. The third line is to cleanse the mind. And it ends with, this is the teaching of all the awakened ones. Bhante Ji spoke to you very briefly about the subjects of the talks for this retreat. And these three subjects are what they call punya karyavatu, bases for meritorious action. These are actions that are skillful and beneficial. The first of that is my topic today. It's called dana. The topic tomorrow is sila. Sila is living by virtuous principles. And then finally, the topic on the third day is bhavana, which is cultivation, cleansing the mind, cultivating it. So, today we'll talk on dana. So what is dana? Dana translates as giving, as generosity. So it's an inclination to give without expecting any form of repayment. Well, without any expectations at all. This concept of giving, of generosity, forms the very, very first step in the Buddha's gradual practice. This Noble Eightfold Path that he taught, this gradual practice that he taught, it starts with dana. And then the next step in the gradual practice is sila. You might see where we're going with that. So it is the first step on the road to renunciation. The Buddha's practice is all about letting go. Letting go of craving, letting go of our suffering. And you don't just start off right off the bat by letting go of craving and suffering. That's a hard, hard thing. It takes a long time. So you have to start where you're at. You have to start from the beginning. Start with baby steps. And that is why this first step is dana. Practicing to let go without any expectations in return. So we'll go over what giving does. I'll talk a little bit about motivations for giving, the intentions for giving, and we'll end up this talk with talking about some practical ways that we practice dana in our daily lives. So, as I stated, right, the Buddha's path is about letting go. And the Buddha talks about three things that he calls the roots of unwholesome activity, or roots of unwholesome action. First one is greed. Next is hatred. and next is delusion. That first one, greed, Pali word is lobha, that is what you're practicing generosity and letting go for. You're directly counteracting one of the three roots of unskillful activity. We'll be talking a little bit more about greed, about lobha, a little bit later in the talk. The Buddha also, as part of the practice, also talks about using our good deeds, recollecting our good deeds, especially in times of doubt and in times of self-criticism. It's called silanusati, recollection of your good deeds. So what dana does, practicing dana, allows you to have the recollection of these good acts in your mind. And this is very beneficial because it allows you to understand what is good and what does that feel like and what is not so good and what does that feel like. And when we talk about generosity, when we talk about giving, most often what we think about is money, right? Especially here in the West, that's the most common thing. Donating to various charities and things like that. And that is definitely part of giving. But it's more than just money or some kind of physical thing, physical gift. You can also be generous with your time. They say your time is the most valuable thing that you have. Right? So in many ways, to be generous with your time is even more of a greater letting go than with your money. And of course then there's effort. And when at the monastery, when people come, they do all these three things. Sometimes they donate to help us monetarily. Sometimes they come and spend time and they put an effort in helping us maintain the monastery. And you do these three things with people and organizations outside in lay life as well. So we want to keep in mind the totality of what is generosity, what is giving. Big and small. We often think that you have to be generous, you have to give something big. But the Buddha says that even if you were to, so he's talking about a monk in this example, a monk who's living in the wilderness and has his bowl and he eats in his bowl. And so even if this person, when they were washing their bowl and they had little rinsings of little food and things in the bowl, even if they said, may whatever beings this might benefit, have this as a benefit. Even that is a basis for merit. So one of the most important things when it comes to generosity is don't overlook the small stuff. The small stuff is where habits are built. And generosity, you can think about people who've been generous to you in your own lives, right? Or generous things that you've done. You might remember really big things, but I can bet that there's a lot of small things too that you remember. Maybe you look up to somebody who is generous in so many innumerable small ways. You can't pinpoint it and say, this one big thing. But it says it is as if they live generosity instead of something that they do occasionally. And so the Buddha gives 8 motivations for giving. This is from a sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya. So if those of you who are interested in actually reading these suttas that we talk about, if you don't catch it during the talks, it's okay. I'm going to put it on the board. The same thing with Bhante Silananda's talks tomorrow and Bhante Gunaratana's talk. Any sutta references, I'll make sure we put it on the board in the hall. So the Buddha enumerates eight motivations for giving. Why people give a gift. The first one is to offend. So you can think there's not always good motivations for giving. So I was trying to think of an example for this, and I thought, since it's coming close to the holidays, what about fruitcakes? What's the joke about fruitcakes, right? We get the fruitcakes and then we re-gift them the next year to somebody you don't like or something like that. That can be an example of, it's using giving as a weapon, right? Using giving as a weapon of aversion. So that's giving to offend. The next is giving out of fear. You might think of people in various countries with like dictators and things like that, people who are living in places where they live in fear of their lives and they have to give, they give hoping that they can survive and these kind of things. So giving out of fear. Or of course like the old, mobsters who go around and getting protection money, these kind of things. People have to give things out of fear. The next is to return a favor. And if somebody gives you a favor, somebody is generous to you, gives you something. For most people, that brings up a feeling of an obligation to that person, that you want to repay that person in some way. So that's another motivation of giving. The next motivation is giving with an expectation, what they call quid pro quo, right? You can think about it like people who donate to politicians' campaigns so that they can, get bills passed later on, these kind of things. You're giving, but you're not giving without expectation. You're giving because you want to get something. The next is giving because giving is good. No intentions other than just because it's a good thing to do. It's a beneficial thing for the giver and the receiver. The next is, it's a long one, but it's really about altruism. It says that I cook, others can't cook or don't cook. It's not right for me to cook without cooking for others. So it's an altruistic feeling of like giving because there are people who are needy, people who can't do something, so you want to, and you can, so that you feel that you want to give in that regard. And of course there's giving to get a good reputation, right? People who give lots of money and then they have the buildings named after them and these kind of things. Right? Giving with the expectation of this is going to make me look good. And then the last is an interesting one. It's to adorn and beautify the mind. For a while I thought, well, what does that mean? That's kind of, how do you adorn and beautify the mind? But in a little bit when we talk about the mind state of somebody who's giving, you can understand that. What does a mind state feel like? Those of you who have been meditating, who can examine your mind, what is a mind state like when it's full of greed and covetousness? As opposed to what is a mind state like when it's full of generosity, letting go. If you understand that, you might come to understand what it means to adorn and beautify the mind. So these are motivations given by the Buddha, why people practice generosity. What about intention? Intention is extremely important in the Buddhist practice. You might say intention is everything, right? Because we understand that there's actions that you might do without the intention of them causing some kind of harm, but they still do. But that doesn't mean that you had the intention to do that, right? So you can give with or without a good intention. So in a sutta, somebody comes up to the Buddha and asks, what is the reason why some gifts bear great fruit and others don't? And the Buddha says, there's the case. He gives two cases. There's the case when some person is giving for their own profit, with the mind attached, and seeking to store up merit for the future. So they're giving because they have something in mind. Right? They're giving because they want to receive. They're giving with a mind attached. And so this, the Buddha says, this is why a gift, even if it was as grand as the world, would not give good results, good fruit. But what about a gift that gives good fruit? This is a person who gives not for their own profit. A person who gives with a mind unattached. A person who is not worried about storing up merit for the future. It's a person who gives because giving is good. The Buddha is telling us there what the intention should be that we practice giving. That doesn't mean that as we practice, we're always going to have these perfect, pure intentions. Now these are ideals to strive for. Right? It's actually, if you really, really look at it, it's really hard to give without having any kind of expectations. In a little bit, I'll talk about managing those expectations when you're practicing giving. And so the Buddha talks about the three factors of the donor. Somebody who is giving, what is their mind like? Before they're giving, their mind is glad. So you can already think, right? This is not a mind of greed and covetousness, a mind of clinging, of grasping. This is a mind that is glad. Because they can think about, this is a good deed that I'm doing. This will help people, and it will also make me feel good about this as well. And so during the act of giving, the person's mind is bright and clear. So again, this is a pure, bright, clear mind, free of attachment, free of greed and covetousness. And then after the act of giving, the person's mind is gratified. They feel good, they feel content that they were able to let go of something, money, physical objects, time, effort, whatever it might be, and they were able to let go of this, and it was able to benefit somebody else. So we can think about, what's the old saying, right? It's better to give than to receive. You can understand why. Right? Just from the mind state. right, of what giving is about, what really giving. You can think about the mind state, you can think about the benefits and the help that it gives to other people. And actually, I just read fairly recently that they've done scientific tests on this, and some of these tests talk about that the person giving has things, I don't remember the specifics of the science, but essentially the person giving benefits from it in their mind more than the person receiving. So that is modern science kind of confirming old wisdom. So this is a pretty short run-through excuse me, of what the Buddha talks about generosity, of giving. I wanted to move into its opposite, right? What generosity is working against. That's our greed, covetousness. Word is lobha. There's many suttas that the Buddha gives, many similes, I should say, that the Buddha gives about the depth of our attachment, of our craving, of our greed. He says that even if there was a whole mountain full of gold, that wouldn't be enough to satiate one person. In the Dhammapada, he talks about even if there was a rain, even if it rained gold, it wouldn't be enough. Bhante Ji likes to make that into a little story where he says, even if it rained gold and a person's house was totally full with gold coins, the person would be excited at first, and then they would think, if I only had a bigger house. That is our greed. That's our covetousness. That's that drive to have, to hold, right? To grasp and to not let go. So that is deep. It's ancient. And that is what we're practicing generosity for. To gradually, slowly lessen the hold that this greed has on our minds. You can think about it in terms of the noble truths, right? First noble truth is the noble truth of dukkha, of suffering. The second noble truth is the origin of dukkha. What is that? It's our craving. Okay? This craving causes our suffering. And you can see that in what happens in your life, but you can also see that in your mind states. You can see as you practice generosity, you can see how that lessens in your mind. You can see over time how things that you might have been attached to and had a hard time letting go of, over time it becomes easier and easier, and you're okay with less, and you attach to less. It's a gradual, slow process of letting go. And so, it's, like I said before, it's the first of the three roots of unwholesome, actions. First is greed, second is hatred, third is delusion. The first, so you can think of this as the I-like mind. This is the mind that wants what it finds pleasurable, wants what it likes. And if it has it, it wants to keep it, doesn't want to let it go. The other half of that coin is dosa, which is the I dislike mind. This is the mind that wants to push away, wants to avoid, that wants to have nothing to do with something that it doesn't like. Then the last is the mind of delusion. This is the I am mind. Often, because we have this, we are attached to this view of a self. Once we own a self, well, the self owns things. This is mine. This is my robe. Okay? This is my seat. And so once we have mine, we don't want to give it up. That's the origin, that's the root of our attachment. And so when we practice the second factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, right intention, the very first factor of that is intention on renunciation. Intention on letting go. So when you're practicing dana, you're practicing the Noble Eightfold Path. You're practicing abandoning these states of greed and covetousness in your mind. And so this is why it seems like it might be something really small. Like people come here and they offer us a meal. It seems like, oh yeah, that's a very nice thing. And you might think of that's something really small. Or maybe you give a little gift to somebody, at Christmas or wherever on their birthday. You think, oh, it's a small thing. But it's actually much bigger than that. Because the important thing, what the Buddha wants us to understand in this, is what it does for our mind. What it does to cleanse our mind of these defiled states. And when we do that, the more we practice this, the more we practice the full extent of practicing dana, sila, and bhavana, the more wisdom we gain. And the more we understand what the benefit of this is. Why we do it. It seems something really small, but it's actually something really big. Because it's going against this greed in our mind. And to talk about the nature of greed, I want to tell a little story. And this is what I call the croissant simile. This was back, I was probably here about a couple months. I've been here now 3 years. And, coming to a place, going from being able to eat whatever I wanted, whenever I wanted, to coming to a place living in a monastery. It was a hard thing to get used to the new kinds of food and these kind of things. And I remember about 3 months in, I was helping the cook, and I noticed that they were making croissants. And here I'm like getting used to like eating beans and rice and these kind of things, and all of a sudden there's like croissants. And as soon as I saw that, man, it just kicked into gears, like, oh, I want these croissants. How many croissants are there? Is there enough croissants for everybody? All these kind of things. So I just like propagating that attachment and that greed in my mind because I want a croissant. And so then, after I helped the cook and we're sitting down and we're waiting, the monks, got up to go and get their food. And I'm thinking to myself, those monks better not eat all those croissants. All these, like this is mine, right? Because I want that croissant so bad that I couldn't even, that's all I could think about was having that croissant. And then when I got up and I was online, because I have lots of issues in terms of eating, I was a big emotional eater, overeater, using eating as a coping mechanism and all that kind of stuff. As part of that, my practice to work against that, what I would do is be the last person online. And of course that day, it worked against me because that's all I could think about. Oh, I'm not going to have any croissants. I can't, I want this croissant so bad. And so it was myself and two people in front of me, and I'm on the line and I look at the croissants, and there's only two more croissants. And all of a sudden I'm feeling like dejected. I'm like, I'm not going to get what I want. Oh, this is horrible. But this is the power of generosity, right? The people in front of me were a married couple. You know what they did? They took one croissant and they split it in half. They shared one croissant. And so then I had a croissant. And it was interesting because I was watching my mind, and I saw just that little act of generosity change my mind state like night and day. All of a sudden, I just that generosity just cut through that greed. And I realized, well, how stupid I was. Like I couldn't I was so wrapped up in that greed and that attachment. Once I was free from it, and this was something that I still remember to this day so vividly, because it was such a quick switch of my mind because of the generosity of other people, just so that I could have a croissant. And then, as our expectations and our cravings usually go, once I had the croissant and I sat down and I was eating it, and I thought, oh, this doesn't taste as good as I remember. Such is the way of our craving and our grief. But I use that simile as an example to show you the power of doing something as simple as splitting a croissant, right? It's a big thing. So never underestimate the power of this. Never underestimate the ability that you have to help somebody in that regard, and also to help yourself. So, with that, I'll move to a section where somebody asked the Buddha, can you see the fruits of generosity here now in this life? Like, what are the benefits of generosity? And he says the first one is, somebody who practices generosity is dear and charming to people. Or you can think about the people who are generous in your life, right? You can think about, how you respect them and look up to them, these kind of things. And with that, you also, a fine reputation you develop far and wide. People understand that, this person is generous and giving. The third is that the person can approach an assembly with confidence, meaning that they can go and talk to people. There's no worries, that they harmed people or anything like that. They have confidence, and they have a mind state and a clear, happy mind, that they don't have to worry at all being around other people. Right? Because they're a generous person, they give of their time, of their effort, etc. And they understand that people are find those kind of people dear. So there's no worries for this person to approach other people. And then the last one is that after this life and the next life, that you can be reborn in a heavenly realm. So those are the four things. And I wanted to give you guys an example. If you've read the suttas, you might have come across a person named Anathapindika. Anathapindika is a very, very, very good person to emulate. Anathapindika was the foremost donor to the Sangha. You can think of him, he was one of the richest persons in that whole area of India. You can think of him almost like as an ancient Bill Gates or something like that. Think about somebody who's really, really, really rich but does a lot of philanthropic things. This was Anathapindika. And so I can't say the majority of the suttas, but many of the suttas start with, in Anathapindika's park, Jeta's Grove, right? So the story behind this park is that he wanted to buy this park for the monks to be able to stay in. And to do so, he had to buy it from this prince. So he had to put on every inch of the ground of this park, he had to put a gold coin. That's how rich he was. That the story goes that he bought this park by putting every inch of the ground with gold. Right? But there's an interesting thing about Anathapindika. That's not his real name. His real name is Sudatta. Anathapindika was a name that the people of the town gave to him. And Anathapindika means giver of alms to the helpless. This was a person who was so generous in giving to other people that he developed a reputation, and he was given this nickname that stuck and that you can read in the suttas all these thousands of years later. So this person, Anathapindika, Sudatta, you can, one of the things that people might think is like, oh, he has so much money, he can, afford to give away things. But as part of his story, he was so giving to people. People would come and ask him, to borrow, loan money and all these kind of things, and he would give it out. And he wouldn't, be like, well, you have to pay it back with interest or all these kind of things. He wouldn't even try to get the money back. He said pay it back when you could. And so that actually put him in bankruptcy. He became destitute. He lost all his money. And even still, when he lost all his money, he was still giving what he could. He was still practicing dana. He was still practicing generosity. And the story goes that he actually ended up getting the majority of that money back over time. So that's just showing you the benefits of this person. Doesn't matter what what his monetary situation was, he practiced giving. It doesn't matter how much money you have, you can practice giving. As a matter of fact, people will remark oftentimes that it's often amongst the most poor people that you find the most generous people. Why is that? Why do you think that is? It's because people who understand what it is to go without and understand the need for people to give. Right? So you can always give something in some way, no matter what your situation is. And so to close this talk out, I want to talk about the practical aspects, right? It's good that you come here and you hear this guy in robes talk about, oh, the Buddha says this and the Buddha says that, and that's really good to practice, generosity. But how do you put that into practice in your life? The first thing is that you want to keep a watch on your mind, right? If you're practicing mindfulness throughout the day and you're watching your mind states, you can see when greed arises, right? Like my example with the croissant, right? You can see when that greed arises. And at that point, you can make the choice to try to counteract that greed. A famous monk, Ajahn Chah, talks about, when he has his food, and if he, if he sees like there is greed in his mind or something like that, he'd push the food away, and he'd say, better to starve than have a mind full of greed, right? So that's the kind of thing that you can do. Like you can watch. If you're mindful, you can see, okay, this is greed, this attachment is coming up. What can I do to counteract that? Right? Sometimes all it takes is just seeing it, understanding. Oh, okay, I have this mind state right now. I'm feeling really attached and greedy. So and when you do that, you're being mindful and you're giving yourself the ability to make better choices. You have the insight and the wisdom in that moment that this action is going to cause me further suffering. So I don't need to do that. So you want to, watching your mind, seeing where greed comes up, how greed comes up, how it affects your thoughts and your intentions. Like when I was talking about, being hungry, waiting, to get the food, these kind of things. The next step is to gradually, slowly cultivate a habit of letting go. One of the things that I started doing a couple of years before I came to the monastery was every 6 months I would do what's called a purge. And so I would go through everything that I owned. Or just go to the basement or wherever, and I'd go through things and I'd decide, can I let this go? And so, so I'd take up something, okay, can I let this go? If the answer was yes, then, okay, can I give it to somebody? Can somebody use it? Is it just junk? I should throw it away. Why am I keeping newspapers from years ago or these kind of things, right? So you're examining that, and that actually helps you to see better how the mind works, because you can pick up something and instantly you have that feeling, I don't want to let it go. You can see that. It's but if you can let it go, okay, well, I'm letting this go. And the wonderful thing is, as you do that, when you start to let go of things, you feel lighter. You feel like you're carrying less of a burden. And then you feel like, this item, I wasn't using this item. What was I? It was just sitting there. Now it can be helpful to somebody else. Now it can benefit somebody else if it's something that I can give away. So you just practice that on a regular basis, every 6 months. Go through your things. What can you give away? What if you something comes up and you can't give it away, you can't let go of it just then, it's okay. Put it aside. And then 6 months later, it comes back again. Okay, put it aside. And then 6 months later, you might say, you know what? I'm ready to let this go. And you let it go. Right? That just something as simple as that. You're cultivating the habit of letting go. So the other thing is to look for opportunities to give. If you're mindful and aware, opportunities present themselves in your life. And you can take those opportunities. For instance, right? You're going to a store, and there's somebody behind you. What can you do? Right? You can hold the door for them. Right? Do you think that is not an act of giving? You're giving of your time, right? You're giving of yourself, because what's the natural inclination? I'm busy. I don't have time for these people. I got to do what I have to do. I'm going to do it. But you're giving just that split second to do something good for somebody else, right? And just all it is holding the door. That's it. That's it. When you're online, in a register, I've worked registers before. I know what it's like. People online, you might as well just be a robot. They don't pay attention to you. They just want their thing and they want to go along, right? I can remember being online, and I think I was working and I was on register, and people are just, I want my cigarettes, or I want this, or I want that. That's how it was. And my mind state's like, when am I going to get off? I can't believe it. How many hours left do I have this? And somebody comes and they say, oh, hi Joe. He's read my name tag. Oh, how you doing? And just talk, just recognizing that, giving that, just that little 10 seconds of their time to be kind to somebody, to give somebody. You know what that person gave me? That person gave me a clear mind state. Because all of a sudden, I felt happy. And it felt calm, and it felt nice. And I thought, wow, just that little thing that person did changed everything. Now, of course, 2 minutes after that person left, another person was like, give me this. And of course my mind state went back down in the tubes. But again, that little silly thing. So you're talking, this is about 10 years ago, this instance that I remember. A 5 or 10 second little thing I remember. All these years later, just from somebody who took the time to, give of themselves in that way. Instead of, I'm here for this, I need this, I have to go here, I have to do that, I have to do this. All of these things. So again, as I'm reiterating, doing this is much more than, just I'm doing something good for somebody. That's part of it. But the power it has to help your mind and to help others is, very great in that regard. And so you can think about looking for opportunities in all the different spheres of your life. And family, right? How are you generous with family? Right? How are you generous with friends? How are you generous at work? People often forget about work, right? But you're spending at least a third of your day working with people, right? How do you practice generosity at work? And then how do you practice generosity in the society at large? If you keep this mindfulness, right, you keep this understanding, this recollection of what are the opportunities that I can practice letting go, practice generosity, then no matter what you're doing all throughout the day, if an opportunity arises, you can take that opportunity and you'll be the better off for it. And so will the people that benefit from your act. And so now we talk about expectations, managing expectations. People often have you can tell when you have an attachment to your action, right? Think about it this way. You give money to a homeless person. What do you expect that they're going to do with it? You might think, they're going to get, eat the food and all these kind of things, and they're going to take this, right? And then what happens if you hear they went and they bought alcohol or something like that? Some people might be like, they're going to use my money for that, right? That's an expectation. You didn't give with no expectations whatsoever. And so this expectation of somebody doing what you think is right with your generosity can be very hurtful and harmful to you. Because when you do that, when you expect something, when you're expecting the world to be a certain way in that regard, then you're setting yourself up for suffering. And when you give a gift, if you give something to somebody and they just throw it back at your face, your generosity is not diminished. The act that you did, the thing that you gave, your action is not diminished, whether they accept it or not. I can remember, driving, and most times people don't want to let other people in front of them, and there's, you know how it is. Most of you probably drive. There's all kinds of rage and stuff on the road, and I remember, letting a person in front of me. And what's the expectation, right? What's in your mind when you let somebody in front of you, or you do something, a kindness for somebody on the road? What do you expect that they should do? Yeah, right? And so I can remember driving, and I, do something kind, and they don't do anything. I'm like, man, who raised these people? I was like, these people, nobody has any gratitude today. And so I remember a specific incident where somebody I let this person in, and they go to raise their hand, and in my mind I just thought like, oh, they're so nice. And then they give me the middle finger. And I was so confused about that. So I'm letting you in. I'm doing a kindness for you. This is what you get. Right? And so I just thought about that, and it's just like, and then I realized like I was making myself suffer just because this person did that. It didn't change that I was, I did this kind thing. I was generous for this person to let them in, right? So this is what I mean by managing your expectations with giving. I remember, maybe it was about 10 years ago now, when there was a hurricane in Haiti, and so many people gave all this money to the Red Cross. And then people afterwards were up in arms because all that money didn't go to that specific thing that they wanted the money to go to. Like maybe it went to Uganda and all these different places, but because the money I gave only for that thing right there, only for those suffering people, right? I don't care about those other people. I don't see them on the news. These people are suffering now. I want to give them money, even though it was so much that they couldn't even use it all, right? You have that expectation. It was a good thing that these people did to donate to an organization that helps people worldwide. But they were so attached to that one incident, that one thing. This is where this should go. So that they all got angry. And now these days, you can go on the Red Cross thing and you can disaster shop. It says, give to this one, give to that one, give to this one. I saw that and I thought that was so silly. But that's the way it goes because people have expectations of what they're giving. It's one thing if the organization was abusing it and people were, going on corporate trips to the Bahamas or something like that. It's another thing if they're using it in a right way. So it's important to manage our expectations. It's also important to be what I call a generosity ninja. What that means is practicing generosity in a way that the people you're practicing generosity for don't even know that you're doing it. Right? Can you do that? It's a really interesting, fun thing to do. Because when we practice generosity, one of the things that we can become attached to is, like, oh, I'm giving this, and then you get attached to like, they're gratified, how happy they are, and they come and they thank you, and you start to, yes, this is good, this is all these things, right? But if you practice generosity and they don't even know it was you, right? That's a good feeling because they don't need to know who it's from. Practicing generosity without the ego attached. I am doing this, and I should get some recognition for this. I can remember the story when I was working, and I worked as a child protective service person and doing foster and adoptive home recruiting, and I had a really big program that I set up. 100 people, all these things, and it was the day of, and I was so busy. And I'm walking across the first floor of my office building, and in comes this father. And this father is like trying to corral all these little children. And it's like, I felt so bad for him. He's just really trying to, one person to try to, corral all these children. And I knew where he was going. He was going to my office. So, and he had to go on the elevator. And so my mind was busy racing. I got to do this, I got to do that. I'm too busy, I'm going to do this, do that. But for a split second, I was able to think about somebody else. I was able to think about, in that mind state of being so busy about what I have to do, I was able to think about somebody else. And it was so simple. The person never even saw it, didn't even know I did it. All I did was press the elevator button so that when he was going to come around to the elevator, he didn't have to sit there waiting for the elevator trying to corral his kids. That's it. Just a simple little silly thing, That, again, this is 4 or 5 years ago. I still remember it. Right? These little things, you just remember them because they're so impactful. They're so opposite of what we normally do and what our minds are normally about, that they're very memorable. And so when we can practice generosity, we can also practice gratitude. Okay? Having gratitude for the things that people do for us and the things that we have is very important. Today, there's a lot of entitlement. There's a lot of, I deserve this, or things should be this way. The Buddha says, very rare in the world is somebody who is grateful. Somebody who is grateful for what they have and is not filled with resentment and filled with desire, not being grateful and content. So gratitude is part of generosity as well. Understanding, thinking of what you have in your life. You can think, well, it could always be worse. That's a very important thing to understand, right? Because if you understand in your life things are tough, it could always be worse. Guess what? Somebody else is having a worse off time than you. And so you can be grateful for that gratefulness, that gratitude can also lead you to wanting to do something, practicing generosity for somebody else. There's always somebody else who's worse off. What can I do? What kind of generosity can I do? What can I let go of? My time, my money, my effort, in a way that is without expectations and that can be of benefit to both myself and others. And with that, friends, the talk on dana is complete. I hope we can keep these thoughts in our minds and as we go throughout this retreat and the future, to keep an eye open for an opportunity to practice generosity. There's always opportunities. We're just not always looking for them. So, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. I forgot my closing quote. The Buddha says, if beings knew, as I know, the results of giving and sharing, they would not eat without having given, nor would the stain of miserliness overcome their minds. Even if it were their last bite, their last mouthful, they would not eat without having shared. If there were someone to receive their gift, but because beings do not know as I know, the results of giving and sharing, they eat without having given, the stain of miserliness overcoming their minds. Let's all work to overcome the stain of miserliness.